you feel annoyed all the time at everything because you're not really being a good sport about the game of life. And I'm not saying that as a sort of dig, I'm saying it more as a wake up call that I think many of us have experienced. So imagine, when you were a kid and something went wrong and you no longer are having fun, you're no longer rather allowing yourself to have fun. And this is the same sort of thing that happens in the game of life. It can actually be prolonged as well for multiple weeks, months, whatever it may be. And it doesn't have to follow a string of events, though it could, but rather it's a non-participatory attitude towards life. So you are probably self-aware. You are probably emotionally intelligent if I were to take a wild guess at you pressing on this video, at you listening to my content. But you can't shake the feeling of just being annoyed in most situations. And maybe, when you're hanging out with friends, it doesn't, I guess, come up as much. But whenever there's not an obvious way or an obvious situation where you can be enjoying yourself, that you find it hard to not be annoyed and sort of in a kind of a pissy mood. And maybe this isn't something you're dealing with right now, but if you can even capture the essence of when you were feeling it in the past or something you may come across in the future, it comes back to that same root problem that we're not being a good sport, we're not being a good participant in the game of life. And this is what I mean. Inherently, life is a sort of construct of rules and imaginary taboos that we've all unconsciously agreed to play into. And you're either aware of that or you are unaware of that. For those who are unaware, there is a sort of bliss that is taken into account. You know, the way that we eat dinner, the way that we dress for certain events, the way that we greet people, the way that we open ourselves to certain people and not others, depending on their status or whatever we think of them, the predisposition that we have of them. There's so many of these imaginary rules and imaginary sort of guidelines that we all play into because it's the sort of game of life, it's the game of society. And some of those rules hold more importance and more merit than others, but nonetheless, it's all an imaginary thing that we're playing into. And that's probably something that you are aware of and something that you're starting to see the pointlessness of. But this game is not pointless because it does serve value. The way that we greet people, the way that we dress, the way that everything else is, I think actually when we start to see the sort of pointless and imaginary nature of these things, we can sort of turn the volume up and say, okay, I see the imaginary nature. I see the illusion of it all. So now I need to play into it. I need to play into it knowing that it's all imaginary. And this is something that doesn't happen when you're sort of feeling annoyed all the time because you're annoyed because you're not seeing the point. And usually this happens unconsciously. Things are annoying you, things are keep pissing you off because you're not seeing the inherent value in many of the things that are happening in your life. And here's the sort of invitation into transformation that I think has worked for me. And that is when you are experiencing those things, when you're experiencing being annoyed, when you're experiencing being in a sort of bad mood a lot of the time, use those gaps in your life, use those inherent meaningless areas of your life as an invitation to create something out of that. So enter into the game of life, participate, be a good sport, play along to the game and maneuver it in a way where you can actually create more of the things that you want in your life. And this is something that a lot of people who have either made great art, who have been ultra successful, or whatever it may be, they've sort of acknowledged this and used this to their advantage. Because if not, your self awareness is going to start to damage your life. It's going to start to create a sort of procrastination in which you're never actually participating in life and you're always sort of observing the faulty nature of it. There are many things wrong in the world, right? And whether we want to argue that is objective or subjective is kind of pointless. There are many inherently meaningless, quote unquote, things in your life, in your day to day. But what are we going to do as a result? Are we going to allow the mundane to make us annoyed, to make us pissed off, to make us bored all the time? Or are we going to allow it to be an invitation into creating more of what we want in life. When we're having dinner with our family or whoever else, if we're having dinner with our coworkers or anything like that, there is a sort of game that we have to play into. And you might say, I don't want to feel annoyed right now. I don't want to feel bored. I don't want to feel in a bad mood. These are the simple things in life that everyone tells me to enjoy. And you're probably trying to question the nature of yourself, and you're probably questioning the nature of your maturity. Are you being selfish? Are you being whatever else? And I think it actually might be something completely different. And what I mentioned before is we're not realizing that, yeah, you might have to inconvenience yourself a little bit to enjoy the situation to a greater degree. Maybe instead of waiting for your emotions and instead of waiting for your brain and your mindset to formulate itself in a way where these things are easier to enjoy, you take that first initiative, you take that first step, and you play along into the game. You force it a little bit. And this is advice that isn't pretty, and a lot of people aren't going to want to hear. And it's because it's not, revolutionary within itself. It's kind of boring, but it actually works because we can talk about programming our minds all we want, and we can do that. But there's going to come points in our life where things are relatively boring, things are relatively not meaningful in that way or in the perspective that we're carrying. And we're going to have to go out of our way to see things from a new perspective and to play into the game. And we can treat it like that. Treat that situation, treat that plan, treat whatever event, treat it as a facet of the game of life and see what you can make of it. Instead of being annoyed by it, instead of seeing the inherent meaninglessness of it, see what you can create of that. Because that's often what we're being invited to do from a much higher perspective. And what I've often found in my life to be ultra effective is the law of opposites. So oftentimes the very things that we're being, maybe annoyed by, the very things that we're finding boring and mundane and not really worthy of our time are the things that we have to transform to see the true nature of our power and who we are. And it makes the inherently enjoyable things so much more great. Because in what we avoid, in what we dismiss, in what we do not face, and in what we do not see the meaning of, is often the very place that is holding the thing that we want. So I've given this example in my upcoming book, and I've talked about it a lot as well, in which there is a teacher, a spiritual teacher, who stands, in front of a crowd, and the first person comes up to them. It's a quote unquote student or people who just come to ask questions. And the person goes up to the teacher and says, I'm doing all these spiritual things. I've relinquished all my material possessions. I've meditated in the woods for all this time, and I still don't feel that spark. I still don't feel as spiritual as I'm hoping to feel. And then the spiritual teacher tells them to get a job, to seek a career, to go back into the material world and to actually succeed in it. And of course, the student dismisses this, and they return a year later and they say, that was the best advice I've ever been given. And actually, in my pursuit of the game of life, in my sort of return into the game of life from a more willing perspective, I actually found a career that fulfilled me in a very interesting and surprisingly spiritual way. And I've met people that I feel deep connections with and that I truly bond with. And overall in my life, that spark that I was looking for was probably in the place that I would least expect to find it. And then we have another example of another student who comes into the teacher's, if you want to call it, room, and they say, how do I be more successful? And then the teacher asks, are you not successful enough? And the student says, no, I want to be more successful. The student wants more material things and whatever of that nature. And the teacher says, go meditate in the woods for 6 months. And obviously the student again dismisses that, but they end up doing it. And then when they return to their normal life, they feel a much more deeper sense of pleasure for what they already have. And they see that what they were wanting was not a deeper level of success, but rather was a deeper relationship with the success that they already had. It was, more raw and authentic connections with the people in their life. It was a more authentic expression in whatever they were doing in their life that they were calling their work. So they return to the teacher's room or seminar, or whatever it is, and they say, "Thank you, that was the best advice I ever gotten." And the teacher says, "You're welcome." And that's sort of the, I guess, clearest example of the law of opposites and how polarity can reveal the very thing that we've been looking for. And those are more extreme cases. And where feeling annoyed all the time often finds itself is in that middle ground where we're not really willing to experience either polarities. And we're using our self-awareness, and we're saying, that basically the spectrum itself is an illusion. The spectrum itself is not worthy of experiencing. And the answer to that sort of self-awareness is, yes, you may be correct inherently. You may be correct from a practical, logical standpoint, but not everything in life is logical. Not everything in life is meant to be deciphered and analyzed constantly. Play into the role a little bit, even if it feels like you're forcing it a bit. Play into the game of life. Inconvenience yourself a little bit. Go out of your comfort zone a little bit. Bear the wrath of others' opinions of you, and, don't be afraid to be seen smiling, laughing, dancing, whatever it may be, because that's often where that annoyance is deeply rooted and stemming from, is this sort of fear of being seen playing the game that you very know is an illusion. But anybody around you that is judging you is not enjoying themselves. Anybody around you that is saying, oh, they don't know that this entire thing is, you know, just a series of social imaginary ideas and rules that we're all playing into, they're going to be the ones that are more miserable, and that might be where you find yourself right now. You might see a person and say, wow, they are so blissfully unaware of, all the factors that make up reality. And all the while, they're enjoying themselves and you are not. Spiritual knowledge is not, and not just spiritual knowledge, psychological information and awareness is not the key to experiencing life in a joyful way, but rather knowing all that you know, embodying all of the philosophical wisdom that you know, and at the same time letting it go into playing the game just as the blissfully unaware seemingly doing so. Isn't it weird how we can take a page out of the very book of the people that we were judging? And oftentimes, that's the very thing that we have to do. Being blissfully unaware is not the only way to enjoy life. You can know all of the wisdom that you know. You can know all of the information that you know about yourself, about your destructive patterns, all of that. And at the same time, you might feel annoyed all the time. You might feel a bit rubbish all of the time because you're unwilling to let go of it all. In a weird way, you've now created an identity around being aware. You've created an identity around being wise and about understanding and knowing all of the things that you do, instead of creating an identity around yourself enjoying life. And now, where you found yourself is this weird sort of sticky place where you're not existing at either end of the spectrum. You're not upset all the time. You're not sad. You're not, you know, beating yourself beating yourself up over the impending doom of the meaningless nature of life. And you're also not completely unaware and enjoying life and, doing all these things that only sort of make you feel good at a shallow level. You found yourself somewhere in the middle where you won't let yourself experience either extreme because you understand the meaningless nature of the spectrum itself. But in that meaningless nature of reality, in all of the ideas and, theoretical taboos that we're all playing into, in all of that, there is an invitation. Like I said before, there is an open door that's saying, you know, come onto the stage because this is where everything is happening. You'll never experience any joy from just observing and just analyzing your life. You'll never experience that joy and that spark that you're looking for simply by watching the people on the stage. You have to in a way, put on an act. And I don't mean put on an act by faking and being someone else, but I mean just by participating in the game. Not being so above the lessons of life. Not being so, I already know how this is going to play out, so why would I experience it? Don't be so, I already know what they're going to think of me, so why would I talk to them? You're dancing with your assumptions and you're believing that you're dancing with reality, but you're not. Be very careful about mixing the wisdom of your mind and your assumptions next to the wisdom of reality. Don't pair and don't equate what you have learned from your own assumptions with what you have learned from actual life showing you the answer to the question you had. Because life doesn't reveal as much, but what it does reveal is significantly more profound. And it's more often that we find these epiphanies, maybe washing the dishes or doing laundry, but we find them in the motions of life. We don't find them constantly reflecting and analyzing the nature of our lives. If there's anything to take away from this video, if there's anything to take away from this sort of little phase of your life where you don't really feel much motivation and you're constantly feeling annoyed, it is that you might have to take more initiative to enjoy life. Maybe you have to put in a little bit more work. Maybe you have to inconvenience yourself a little bit more to enjoy life the way that you want. And also, before I sort of finish here, ask yourself why. Why and what's missing? And I'm not going to tell you to go get those things because that's going to fulfill you. But I'm also going to say, don't be so quick to shut off your desires because you believe that you are above them right now. It is quite possible that those desires are in your life as a means to revealing more about yourself and revealing more about, your truest essence. Maybe in the nature of going out of our comfort zone to get something that we desire, we grow and we become closer to the person that we've always wanted to become. And this is what I mean by don't try to jump ahead of life. It is human to desire certain things. It is human to want certain things. So simultaneously, do what you can to experience the desires that are deep in your heart, all the while allowing yourself to let go and be present without attaching yourself to anything too distinctly. Most importantly, play along. Play into the game. You can exit at times. You can realize the false and illusionary nature of it all in meditation or wherever you find yourself reflecting. But for the most part, if you want to enjoy life, you have to play. You have to play. Because that's what it is. When we were kids and we weren't having fun, it's because we weren't allowing ourselves to play. One thing upset us, we got a little bit frustrated, and we immediately shut ourselves off. We turned our backs to the game. And that's not being a good sport. And of course, at the beginning, it's going to feel like we're forcing it. It's going to feel like, the water is quite muddy to walk through, and it doesn't really feel like it's working. But just keep playing along a little bit, and you'll see that life has an interesting way of roping you into events and situations you would have never dreamed of, and it's only because you decided to play along. And now what may have become of your annoyance in one aspect may have been you finding yourself in that same comfort zone, sitting in your room, being sort of not pissed off, but not happy at the same time, but sort of just kind of cruising and just taking it as it goes. That could have been the first option, and now you're experiencing a second option in which your very decision to not let that annoying feeling completely control you and completely rule the way you live your life, you may now find yourself in a quite funny and quite unique situation, an experience that only comes about because you decided to play along. Hopefully you guys understand the sort of message that I'm trying to get at, and hopefully that as a result of playing along, as a result of kind of just putting in a little bit of that effort, that annoyance can slowly start to dissipate as we don't allow it to completely cultivate the way that we're going to live our life. That's it for today's video, guys. I hope you enjoyed it. Make sure to like and subscribe if you're watching on YouTube, and if you're listening on Spotify. Thank you as always. That's it for me. I will see you guys in the next one. Peace.